Hi guys, welcome to Studio Wildlife. Today I'm going to show you how to turn a little sketch into more of a finished artwork. Specifically we're going to be drawing a lion today. So we'll turn something that looks like this into something that looks a little bit more like that. If you enjoy the video, please do hit like and subscribe. It really does mean a lot to me. So if you watched my last video, I talked you through the simple process of drawing a lion. It wasn't particularly very good. It looks like this. It's just a sort of rubbish little drawing, little sketch that only took me about 20 minutes. I was doing it from my head as well, so it isn't going to look massively realistic when you're doing things from your head. So I always recommend using a reference photo. Basically what I'm going to do is show you how I go from my initial sketch, which I'll put up on the screen here, to a more finished charcoal drawing, sharing you with my process and some of the tips that I have for making things look realistic. So let's start. So I start my piece by blocking in the basic shapes, the basic structures, the shadows, using charcoal powder and just a sock. This is so that I can establish my darks and my lights and tone the canvas, which I can later use a rubber to erase some of those marks. Then I will start to refine the drawing a little bit more using a blending stump. I think they're sometimes called a tortillon, and I use that blending stump, I'll just call it a blending stump, dipped in the charcoal powder to draw in the basic shapes and the basic structures of the lion. I use the charcoal powder and the blending stump because it allows me to do dark marks, but they can still be erased later on using a rubber. I'm not really focusing too much on details, it's more about building the basic shapes, the basic structures, those dark areas. I start with the eyes. I always start with the eyes in all of my pictures because I think that they are the most important parts if you want to go for realism, because they're the parts that convey life and make your pieces look alive. I'm not focusing too much on details at this point. I'm more focusing on blocking in the basic shapes and adding marks and variation to the dark areas of the lion's face. So you can see I'm just building up those darks. Move on to the nose next, because that's also an area that you can get a lot of life in, and make it look wet, make it look round, make it look 3D. And I just basically repeat the process using that blending stump, using the charcoal powder to add the areas of shadows and build up the shapes and structures a little bit more. The blending stump is really good for this because you can use it in two ways. You can use it pointed down like a pencil for smaller marks, or you can hold it on its side and you can use the edge of the blending stump and that will give you bigger, rougher marks, which is great for adding that variation and that interest to your picture. Next, as you can see here, I am using a putty eraser to bring out some of those highlights. It's really easy using the putty eraser to pick off that charcoal that I'd put down originally. Because it's only loosely put on the paper, it's really easy to just pull away and leave those white marks. For the detail of the lion, I always use the putty eraser. The putty eraser is what adds the white hairs, the lines, the thing that gives the piece detailed fur. I don't use a pen or a pencil or anything like that. I use this putty eraser to pull away the details from that charcoal. Now you can see here that again, starting with the eyes, just pulling away that charcoal with the putty eraser. Good little tip with the putty eraser is to move it around in your hands quite a lot, and this will just remove some of the charcoal that it picks up, and it will also keep that point sharp so that you can keep going with that detail. Sometimes I use a rubber pencil as well, or an eraser pencil. This is really good. It's a little bit harder than a putty eraser and harder than a normal eraser. This is really good because it doesn't pick off as much of the charcoal as the putty eraser. So it still leaves some slightly greyed out marks, which is really good for the areas that you want small details and the areas where you want shadow, because it doesn't bring the paper back to pure white, it leaves it as a sort of mid-tone grey, which is exactly what you want for the areas of detail in the shadows, because you don't want them looking too bright. For the bigger, long strands of fur, the brighter fur, the areas that are going to be in the light, that's where I'll use the putty eraser. But for the areas that are in the shadow, where I want smaller, finer fur, that might be darker, that's where I use the eraser pencil. And you can see I'm just working on the mane, and again, when you're working on the mane, just like I said in my last video and all my videos, variation is really, really important. You want each strand to look a little bit different from the ones next to it. So you want to add different size strands, different clumps, different shaped clumps. Some clumps will curve to the left, some will curve to the right, all following the general flow of their fur, but having different curves, different directions, just to mix it up a little bit. Once I've done that, once I've added in most of the detail with the eraser, I'll move back in with a piece of charcoal that is a bit more controllable. So for this one, I'm just using vine charcoal. Sometimes I will use a charcoal pencil, but either work. I went with the vine charcoal here because I didn't want the piece to look as dark. I wanted it to be a bit lighter than my usual work. And the vine charcoal gives just a dark grey colour as opposed to a black colour. All I'm really doing is adding in some finer hairs, some darker hairs, and some more refined shadows. It's really important, if you are using charcoal, that at this stage you don't press too hard, because there's so many pieces of charcoal that I've snapped. In fact, pretty much every piece I do, I end up snapping about 3 or 4 pieces of charcoal because I just get too carried away and I just end up snapping them. Doesn't really matter, you can just use shorter pieces of charcoal, but it's just really annoying. Again, started with the eyes, just darkening them off. Not too fussed and focused on detail. So when you're really close up to a painting like this, it's not about adding every single individual strand of fur. I know it looks like I've done that, but it's not what I've actually done. All I'm doing is giving the impression of detail rather than actual details. That will save you time, it'll save you effort, and it will actually mean that your paintings and your drawings look more realistic than painting every single strand of hair. So just working on the muzzle, just working on the face, just building up those darker areas just like I did before, just like you saw with the eyes. And it's about building up the areas of shadow, refining those tiny little darker hairs that you see, doing it again in the mane. The mane, I've pressed a lot harder with that charcoal. This is because the mane needs to be darker. It's going to be blacker in this piece from my reference photo, which means I needed to press harder. Not too hard, again, because it breaks. In fact, I think you can see here that it broke a little bit. And I'm just blocking in basic dark shapes. I'm not stressing too much about where they go. When people think about realism, usually they stress about having to get every single thing, every single mark in the right place, the right colour, the right tone, but it's not about that. It's about being creative. It's not about copying a photograph exactly. If you're copying a photograph exactly, what's the point? You may as well just get the photograph. It's about putting your own mark, your own stamp, your own style on it. And that does mean some variations from the photograph. That doesn't mean don't use your photograph, because references are fantastic. And I do have a blog post about looking at references if you want to go and check it out over at studiowildlife.com. It's all about where I get my reference photos from and how to choose a good reference photo. Anyway, back to the drawing. I'm just using the putty eraser to erase the whiskers and just darken them up. That is pretty much it for the lion itself. When I'm doing my pictures, I like to make them a little bit more abstract, just to add that interest, a little bit of variation. To do that, well, this is something that a lot of people ask about, so I'm going to share with you in this video how I do it. It's really, really straightforward. All you need is charcoal powder, a brush, and some acetone, and a spray bottle. So I start by very, very loosely spreading charcoal powder around the page in the areas that I want my abstract marks. It's really, really important that it's loose and just sprinkled on there or spread very lightly and not rubbed into the paper. Next, I use acetone in a spray bottle and I just spray it over that loose charcoal, and it leaves those really interesting spots and splatters, bubbles that I am known for in my pictures. The spray bottle that I've got, just cheap, but it's really good because it's got 2 different nozzle settings. It's got a fine mist, which is good for the smaller little things, and it's got a squirt option, which is good for the bigger patterns that I have sometimes in my pictures. I lay it down flat because I didn't want any drips for this picture, but if you want drips in your work, just stand the painting on an easel and do the spray when it's stood on an easel, and that spray, that acetone, will drip down, dragging that charcoal with it, leaving interesting drips on your page. Really, really straightforward, really, really simple. To finish it off, I just add some more abstract marks with a big chunk of charcoal, and that's it, pretty much done. This piece was actually a commission, so the person that commissioned it, the client, wanted some gold leaf adding, so this is what you can see here. You can see the little bits of gold leaf that I've added, and it's now hanging in her home in Monaco, which is fantastic. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, please like and subscribe to our channel, we really appreciate it. And if you need any more help with your wildlife art, head over to studiowildlife.com.